And that's very, very normal. Your first book is always going to be the furthest from where you are right now as an author. You're going to have to excuse the sound of children playing. I live right next to a park. Just a shame that I feel like... Dear God. Anyway. This is going to be my very first book review on my site, and as such, of course, I would like to have this structured in some manner. So we're going to try a 3-structure method with bookends because, of course. So we're going to start out with an introduction, and this introduction will include the year the book was published and what was going on politically in the world while this was happening. Because I have learned through my literature courses that chances are the book is definitely affected by the things that were going on in the world at the time. So we are actually going to look at that, and it will include the summary of generally what the book is about. Then we're going to move into the first point, which is structure. I am a writer, so I can't just turn that off, and a lot of times the structure can make or break a story. If you're using first person, second person, if you have a lot of time skips, those kinds of things, if done properly, can really enhance a book. But if done improper, it can make a book really painful to get through. Part 2 is going to be characters. I can actually forgive a lot of sins in writing if the characters are really good. So I think it's a mark of a good author if they can make a solid character where their voices are very distinct and I can clearly remember them long after I've read a book. 3 is going to be overall message, or what I got out of a book when I walked away from it. So for this one, not all books necessarily are meant to have a message per se, but you will usually walk away from a book with either a message or a general feeling from it. And it's up to debate how useful this is, because at the end of the day, a book is entertainment. But I still want to cover that because sometimes an author is trying to go for something, but they might not have pulled it off in a way. So we're going to discuss that as well. And then at the very end, we're going to close out with end thoughts. So the first book review on my channel is going to be one about Rachael Stevens' In a State of Flux. As always though, I need you guys to check out the information down below. There's information on how you can help in the world today with all the things that are going on. Please do so. It is really important to help, and because we're going to get into political stuff today because we can't not. The nature of this book is political, so gear up. Rachael Stevens' first book, In a State of Flux, was published in 2014. Now, I was pretty sure when I saw that date that something pretty big had happened in Scotland that year, and I double checked it, and yes, I was correct. So during 2014, her book came out, I believe in May 2014, but in later that same year, results for a very, very, very important vote had come to light. And that vote was whether or not Scotland would remain as part is a little generous, more like under England's thumb. And it was a big deal. There were pros and cons to both sides, because of course a pro of being independent is that you're independent, and a lot of the very traumatic rules that England had long since opposed would be gone, and Scotland would have its own voice again. The bad side is, though, a lot of economy is so tightly linked to England, and the worry was that without that kind of infrastructure, Scotland would have collapsed in on itself. It's impossible to tell whether that would have actually happened or not, but there are a lot of factors at play, and it's definitely not a simple matter at all. So keep in mind that this was on the horizon, and people knew that this decision was going through at least a year to 2 years prior to the decision being made public. So that meant, I mean, I was finding articles on this being a thing back from 2013. So during that time, Rachael was either writing it, or she was at least pretty deep into the editing phase of this novel when all of this was going on. And it was published earlier in the same year that the final decision would be announced. So this was a huge political thing going on in Scotland at the time, and I definitely think it had an effect on Rachael's work. It pretty much follows the life of one girl who she is trying to imitate a very famous street artist called Flux, who had made very provocative art. Provocative might not be the right word. She made art that really stirred people up politically for quite some time, and then she mysteriously disappeared. And so our main character is trying to imitate her work, but she feels like something's missing, but she's not sure what. And that's kind of where our story picks up. And yeah, it's about kind of an evil corporation that owns a lot of things, and they're kind of the main villain. And so it's kind of a little bit of like the anti-capitalistic kind of thing. It's unclear whether the world itself is actually dystopian or not. It's kind of questionable. So let's just go ahead and slide into our first section, which is structure. So in structure, I'm also going to talk about genre, and two of the main genre points that are kind of weird to me in the book was the setting being kind of dystopian-ish. There's not really any very clear indication of suppression of people's rights being shown. They kind of imply that art is somehow repressed, but you don't really clearly see that. I would just say that the society they live in is pretty heavily policed. So, you know, I wouldn't call it dystopian personally, though I can see why it can sometimes be put into that category. Another strange category that I didn't even know it was in until I looked at Goodreads was magical realism. The reason that's confusing is because the character that supposedly is involved in the magical realism aspect, I thought she was straight up crazy for most of the book. And it wasn't until pretty much the end in one of the last scenes that I was like, oh wait, is this a real thing? She actually has magic power? It was very confusing, it was very vague, and a lot of the books that I've read prior that have magical realism, they have almost a dreamlike quality to them, and so when the magical realism hits, you do know that something's off, but it still follows the tone of the story. But in this case, the tone of the story is very serious, not dreamlike at all, very this is how it gritty happened in a gritty way. And so when the magical realism or supposed magical realism parts happened, I did not read it that way at all, and it felt insanely jarring when it had its reveal at the end. But honestly, the roughest part of this section for me was definitely the time jumps. So how the book is structured is it's broken into chapters, and the chapters are further broken up every few paragraphs, not pages, paragraphs. Every few paragraphs you will change timelines. So the first one is present day, or this many days after or before an event at this time in the morning. And then a few paragraphs later, 5 years ago at 12 p.m. It does this every few paragraphs, and sometimes you also change characters in addition to places on the timeline. This made reading this book an actual nightmare for me. There were multiple times in the book where I got so frustrated I almost threw my phone, which is what I was using as my e-reader at the time because I was traveling. So when I actually first came to Japan, I was reading it. And I remember one or two places almost having to stop and draw out a timeline to try to figure out what happened when, who knew what when, and their motivations at that time. I can understand how this kind of structure can be a huge boon depending on what kind of book you're writing. Books like mystery books can get a lot out of this kind of a structure setup, but honestly, I felt that this added nothing to the book. Instead, it just distracted. I don't really feel like the mystery of whatever happened to Flux, I never felt that that was a big enough mystery to justify the vast confusion that was caused from the back and forth. It would have been a lot better if we had just like two main characters and maybe it switched between their perspectives. And because those two main characters had a limited perspective and limited information, that's all we saw. That would make more sense. You could travel in a linear fashion. It'd be a lot easier to keep track of information, keep track of what was going on, and keep track of your characters. But that's just me and my personal opinion on the matter. This is actually where I feel Rachael really shines as a writer and why I can see her skills in this book despite having such struggle with the structure. Her characters are actually really solid. They have really good, clear character voices. I could always tell who was talking, even if I had skimmed a little too fast over the character tags. So that's really good. That's a really good sign. It's hard to craft characters that are so clear in their voice that you know who's speaking no matter what. But that's always a goal for character creation, is that it should be very clear who's speaking at all times. And she did a great job with that. They pretty much never acted out of character, in my opinion. They kept to what they were, and yeah, I think the characters were really well done. I think they're the best part of the book. It's just a shame that I feel like, dear God. Anyway, I just feel like it's kind of a shame that the structure of the book and also the next part I'm going to discuss, I feel like kind of kept the characters back a little bit. Oh, this next part is gonna hurt a lot. So, this is my biggest pain point with this novel, was definitely the takeaway. So, the general consensus of the book isn't necessarily bad by itself. It's the idea that if you know something wrong is going on, especially with big corporations, like, they should be called out, you should speak up, and you should act if you can to do something. And if you don't, you're just as guilty of being part of the problem. I do agree with that mostly. However, this ties in with one of the flaws of the characters. Every single one of the main characters in the story, aka everyone who has a voice in the story, is middle class to upper middle class, slightly high class citizens. All of them. There's not a single character who's on the poverty line. One particular scene which really exemplifies the problem I have with this. So the scene was, and this is a slight spoiler, but not by that much. This is something that's kind of revealed pretty early on in the book. The main character has a run-in with the main villain, and when she gets away and gets home, she realizes that most of the food in her home is actually produced by the company that's doing these horrible things. She has a panic about it and starts en masse just throwing out food. She throws out pretty much all the food in her pantries entirely. I felt physically ill when reading that scene. And this is a little bit about me, but my family wasn't on the poverty line technically. However, I very clearly remember times when my mom would dig through the pantry to find any and everything she could, because we were in the middle of the week and we weren't able to go to the grocery store for more food for a couple more days. Now, I'm very blessed in that my mom was always able to pull something out of the air. We always were eating. We were always able to eat. But there were times, sometimes multiple days in a row, where we ate what we had. Let me put things this way. If I'm a single working mother and my little kid says, "Mommy, I'm hungry," I'm not going to look at the back of what food I can afford and say, "Oh, it's made by Nestle, I guess we're not eating today, little Timmy." Like, no, I'm going to feed my kid, and I really don't care where the food is coming from. I just don't. My kid needs to eat, and I can only afford certain kinds of things. Not everyone is able to get a hold of alternatives, and not everyone has the funds to do so even if they want to. So you do have to keep those things in mind. With these kinds of revolutions and these conversations, yes, companies and these authority figures need to be called out and held accountable. but also when you are part of the protesting, you do need to keep in mind your privilege in the ability to protest. Being able to protest is a privilege, and there are people who would be protesting with you if they could, but can't because of their position. They can't afford to lose their jobs. They have to feed their families. They have children who are at risk or in danger, and they're trying to keep them safe. You need to understand that, and it's very important that you do so. And I don't think that their voices should be ignored in these kinds of conversations. Now, if this book, if the evil corporation had been about like an electronics company, like something that it would be a huge pain to not have in your household, but you could get away with not having, that's one thing. But we're talking about food. Food is necessary for life. It's something you can't avoid. You have to eat so you don't die. So when you're looking at a life necessity, this conversation needs to address those who cannot take care of themselves while you have your little revolution. It might seem like this is the right thing to do, but you're throwing all the poor right under the bus. And unless you're going to take care of them in the interim while something gets figured out, you're just as bad as the evil corporation, because you're sacrificing other people for your ideals. It's ends justify means mentality, and there are serious problems with it for a reason. Now, of course, I don't necessarily think Rachael meant for that to be where the conversation headed, but it's unavoidable. Like I said, all of the characters are upper or middle class. They are in no way, shape, or form worried about finances. Like, I think the main character at one point, she says that she's like a janitor or something like that, but she almost never goes to work. We don't see her struggle in any way, shape, or form financially. So in my head, I'm like, she reads as middle class, upper middle class too. Like, I'm middle class, but I do have to think about finances and be careful. Like, I don't know, like, it reads as very, very privileged viewpoint, and all of the characters have this very privileged viewpoint, which makes it really, really difficult to root for them all the way through. So, overall thoughts. My overall thoughts are, the simplest statement is, I think Rachael has talent as an author, but I think that the book needed stronger content editors behind it. I think that the way it was formatted was very confusing for really no reason. There wasn't a lot of payoff for how it was formatted. And also the overall message was rather one-sided and came off as pretty privileged. And which is a shame, because I think the topic is a good one. The problem is it's a very broad topic, and that there's a lot of moving parts to it, and I just feel it was oversimplified for the sake of the book. So those are just my personal thoughts, though. Y'all can think differently. This is not to bash Rachael in any way, shape, or form. Again, these are just simply my opinions. These are, this is what I thought when I was reading the book, and these were my frustrations when I was reading the book. When you do publish something, put it out to the public and put a price tag on it, you do open yourself up to criticism. Again, I do think she's a talented author. I do. I just think that certain parts of the book really held back her talent. But I'm curious if you guys have read State of Flux, what your general thoughts on it were. You can go ahead and put in the comments below. Also, let me know if this format worked for you guys. Do you like this? Do you want to see other book reviews? I have thoughts on Fangs. Of course it's a vampire book. Of course I read a vampire book. I have thoughts on that book. I have thoughts on quite a few books. So let me know if you're curious about more book reviews, and let me know in the comments below. Also, let me know if you have any questions for a Q&A. I am working to get that done. It might be a collaboration with another YouTuber here, which I'm really excited about. So yeah, I hope you guys are doing well. Again, check the links below for ways you can help out. And always remember, you can help out in very small ways too in your community. Hand out water, hand out food to those who need it. Thank you very much, and I am gonna turn on the AC. I am hot. Ugh. Bye! Of course the kids are quiet now when I'm done filming.